They say a week is a long time in politics, so how on earth are we going to fit a whole year in? Government has lost 2 ministers and countless senior civil servants. The Chief Minister exudes confidence and bold ambition, but has enough real change actually been delivered? What meaningful action has occurred to deal with the housing crisis, which was big on the lips of all the wannabe MHKs at election time? I'm joined by political heavyweight Juan Watterson, Speaker of the House of Keys, and Claire Christian, who has demonstrated an ample ability to slice through the spin and the rhetoric. So after that, I suppose we better get started. Juan Watterson, well, we're here to talk about the political year. Obviously, the most momentous, or I would guess the most momentous part of that political year happened in the week that's just finished. But are there any particular highlights that stand out for you this year that you'd like us to start with?
Gosh, I mean, what a year it's been. I mean, the general election year for a start. So right way back to September, it must feel like 2 years ago already when we actually got started on this administration. Then the Chief Minister's elections and launching straight into the Ireland Plan. I nearly called it the Programme for Government again, but it's a different name every time, isn't it? But it has been a pretty big year, really, in politics. Lots of changes, and who knew that there were going to be so many changes so recently on the council ministers front as well? That's been a real shocker, and that was really the start to this week, wasn't it? Tuesday, 10:30, and the press release that Mr. Crookall was leaving, and I think that caught us all by surprise.
And I mean, it appears that the minister just didn't get on with some of his colleagues, and that seems to be the reason that's being given for him leaving. But was he a bit of perhaps the word is an oblong peg in a round hole in economic development, or do you think it's purely just down to personality?
I don't know. Tim's a worker, and Tim's a real team player. He's one of the sort of best people in Tynwald. So for him to walk away must have been something quite significant. Because I say he is a real team player and will pick up any challenge that's thrown at him. I'm looking at you when I say that no one picks up DOI lightly, but there, Phil, Tim threw himself into the challenge, and I think you could put Tim in any department, really. So it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out over the weeks and months ahead.
Claire Christian, any phone calls yet from the Chief Minister?
Absolutely not. I don't think I'll be getting that phone call, Phil.
You've certainly, during this parliamentary year, been quite a critic of the government. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. I think I have a lot to prove as chair of the Economic Policy Review Committee. And although I don't speak for the committee in Parliament, it's certainly, I would say it's expected of me to have a good standing and to be constantly looking at those areas and challenging them.
And particularly, I mean, well, I suppose in terms of your roles, I mean, you are a member of 2 departments, which is quite onerous in itself, together with being chair of the Economic Policy Review Committee and chair of planning. So you're not slacking. No,
I always said I have a huge capacity for a lot of work. That's how I have, how I've been value for money, I would say. But it's really important for me to have been part of those roles, carrying on my role in education, and taking on something new in terms of DEFA, and also, as my colleagues just pointed out to me, also I'm being chair in EPRC. I'm also a member in Public Accounts Committee as well. So it's a really all-round scenario that I have, and I really thoroughly enjoy it.
And in terms of highlights for you for the year so far, where would you say you would like to pick?
Well, I'm sure that the Chief Minister probably won't look back on the moment that his Ireland Plan didn't go through as fondly as I do, because I think that's when he probably was expecting this to be smooth sailing, but it certainly wasn't smooth sailing. And we're not here as politicians to necessarily cause problems or delay things, but we want things done right, and that's our job. And so we must always, no matter what, see that as constructive, and I think it was constructive.
And Joan Watterson, do you think it was unfortunate timing that Daphne Kane chose to bring forward her motion this month to say that 6 weeks is too long to expect departments to have their business on the agenda, bearing in mind that we seem to have managed to cram 2 Tynwald's worth of business into the July Tynwald compared with May and June?
Well, I mean, it was due review, and it's something that has only sort of come to the end of its first year of being tried. It's quite an innovative thing that we're doing in terms of making sure that the government puts motions on the order paper with plenty of time for the rest of us to read, research, because there's a huge amount of work goes into to looking at the secondary legislation. It might ultimately not provoke a big debate at the end of the day if you're happy that all your questions have been answered, but going through, checking what the regulations were before, whether the ones you've got now are an improvement, sanity checking that against, your constituents' caseloads over the years and comparing it to other jurisdictions. And doing that for all of the 50-odd items on the order paper, that's quite a lot of work. And then last week we had a big pile of presentations from departments about it, so an opportunity to ask questions, but then that's time that you're not being able to do the research. So there's an awful lot to fit in any 2 weeks before Tynwald. Throw in Tynwald Day for good measure, and Tynwald Day guests coming over and all the rest of it. It makes for a really crammed timetable, and I'm sure that Claire would have been the same. There were a couple of nights last week I was only getting to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning trying to get through all the stuff that there is to do. You wouldn't necessarily know that looking at a Tynwald sitting. But is one size fits all at 6 weeks the right way of doing it? Well, probably not, excuse me. Because some of these things do take longer than others. Some of it's about appointing people to political vacancies, and there's different levels of urgency and priority to these things. So it is about right we had a good look at it over the summer, and look forward to canvassing the views of members to see how we can smooth that process so that it works for everyone.
And of course, one person's urgency, Claire Christian, is another person's actually we don't need to deal with this, and we could leave this a few months.
I mean, let's look at just to take an example, the 6 weeks on the business of register of business, it is actually hugely essential. Let's look at the example of the economic strategy. We didn't get that on the 6 weeks of business. It was only a statement. We were only allowed to ask questions, not debate it. And that's a real telling, for me, scenario that the government still haven't learnt lessons from the last administration, that they're still trying to push through, reports on us with very little time to review this.
The Chief Minister, though, would say that this is releasing the strategy at this stage, and that there will be a full debate in November. So perhaps let's give him a little bit of the benefit of doubt on that.
I would challenge that and say, do we have November? Do we have the time? We're in a real crisis right now with our economy, and that concerns me, that our strategy, which has only just literally hit our desks, and what is going to happen between now and November, and then if nothing else happens, how long have we got from November till however long something changes, policy directives do start coming into play. And we always get criticism about how things take so long in government, and I would say, every single member who went up for election said the economy was one of their top 3 priorities, economy growth, etc. So it's really interesting that there's not full speed ahead on this, and we know government can move fast.
And of course, housing as well was everyone was talking about a housing crisis. Has government done enough on that, Juan?
Well, no, but before I move on to housing, just you strap yourself in, because I think I'm going to defend the Chief Minister here. I think I think that he has done the right thing. Government always wants their PR around launching things before Parliament gets its clutches into it. That's nothing new. But I think he's got the summer to take the Manx people on the journey and educate about what this plan is and whether they're ready for it or not. I've got my own concerns about whether government is really ready for this plan yet. So they've got a fair old amount of work to do over the summer as well, because they really didn't have compelling answers to how they're going to deliver this in terms of the size, the shape of government, and what sort of institutions are going to be push it, because you cannot do a plan of that magnitude as business as usual. So that is going to take time. So coming back for a debate in November, when hopefully we've got a few more of these answers, is important. In terms of housing, no, I don't think that enough's been done. We've seen a bit of catching up with the first-time buyers rules and things like that. But I don't underestimate the challenge. Housing is the first issue that we've picked up again as the Poverty Committee. We recognise it's a really important area. From what I'm gathering, looking at the economy at the moment, you've got the builders are on full tilt, the planning systems are trying to run and catch up, and there's an awful lot of opportunity out there, but with difficulties getting supplies to the island, difficulties getting the labour here, because people... It's a vicious circle, isn't it? If you can't afford to live here, then how are you going to get people to come in and build the houses? It's a real issue that there is no magic bullet for, and that's a challenge.
And not only that, we've got every other jurisdiction that are experiencing exactly the same thing. So in Jersey and Guernsey, they've also got exactly the same plans to putting in a housing strategy, attracting people to their islands. And we're competing in a really, really fierce market. So we've got no time to sleep on this.
And again, Claire Christian, I mean, you're chair of the planning committee. You specifically asked the Chief Minister, would he thank the hard-working, under-resourced planning team, and the Chief Minister then went on to thank everybody else, but didn't seem to specifically address that point. Is there a problem there in terms of Council of Ministers and the planning team? There was an awful lot of talk, lots of rhetoric about we need to fix the planning system, but not an awful lot by way of detail.
I mean, I think you'll have to ask him why he didn't do that, but I would assume that it's probably because he didn't want to single out a certain area or a certain team. However, we have singled out in that time before. My point of raising that was as also my directorate is planning and building control, and I know I've gone in and I've immediately seen that there's a staffing resourcing issue, and that hasn't been addressed sadly prior, and a lot of criticism gets given to the planning team that they're behind or they're not doing what they should be doing. But if they're under resourced, we're setting them up to fail. So I wanted to take that moment to say thank you, because I think that was deserved to them. And yes, of course, it's a shame the Chief Minister wouldn't do the same, but he would have to answer why he didn't.
So in terms then of the planning side of your vast array of jobs in government and in Parliament, what would you say are the priorities for planning in terms of reform, or is it purely a resource issue?
No, it's not just a resource issue, but that's obviously the operational side resource. Also the IT system, that's very onerous. It's almost archaic, Jurassic in that aspect. So it's updating that side to make the daily life of the planners a lot better and a lot simpler. But there's also, in terms of policy changes, extending permitted development. That's really, really key. And it's what's really been great is I've at kind of both at both ends. So I see 20% of the actual planning applications coming through as planning chair. So I can see a sort of a small percentage of why are we seeing that for a window, to expand the size when you've got three other windows exactly the same, and just different things like that, and just feeding that back to policy, which is in Cabinet Office, saying, come on, let's extend these permitted developments, let's take all these little scenarios that actually it's getting to planning for no reason at all. So that's really one of the key areas. Also, and I'm not sure of the in terms of the sort of technical term that government are given, but it's almost that fast track scenario for big, massive developments, and it's looking at that and how we can make that a lot easier, a lot better, more progressive, and how we can. It attracts good investment to the island, and I think that's really important, especially with our sort of huge aspirations to grow the economy and grow our population.
I think the flip side to that, though, is that if we're going to be doing more of that, and I absolutely support in terms of more permitted development and the likes, we need to then have confidence in the planning system, and one of the things that has let that system down is about the proper enforcement, and we haven't had the resources in enforcement, and that is where people lose faith with the system. It's not so much just the delays in getting an application considered, but when people see that the rules aren't being followed, if they don't feel that it's been done properly, then that's really where public confidence sort of falls apart.
And we talk about public confidence a lot now, and one of the other areas is obviously everybody's, the bingo word is transparency, and that's something else that I was very heavily on. I want to see a dashboard that shows a plan. If I want to build a house now today, how long is it going to take to get through planning? What's the status of our planning applications? And it should be really open and transparent, and that's exactly the same in building control as well. We should be able to see the situations on the current status of that. So that's one of the other areas that we're looking at too.
But again, another area where actually the planning's really stepped up recently is in terms of our built environment, our heritage assets, and really recognising those as well. So you look at the consideration of the Cosy Nook for registration. I don't think there being any real considerations for buildings to be registered for quite some time, and now there seems to be a lot of resource going into making sure that we're recognising the important parts of our heritage and protecting it, which I think really is a very positive development in recent times.
And of course that committee has just had calls for evidence, the one that Marlene Masker established, and again, one of the issues in relation to this massive growth in population that is being talked about is the other side to the coin is the concern of many people who are established in the island or Manx-born who actually don't want to see significant change. They don't want to see the massive change that a new residence drive would bring. And every time we've had these new residence drives in the past, things like planning, heritage, culture, the mysterious Manx way of life, which obviously has changed over the decades, but these sorts of things don't seem to have been referenced at all by this new economic strategy, which does seem a bit strange to me. Do we never learn the lessons of history, Claire Christian?
I think you're right. I think there'll always be two sides of the argument as to why we should and why we shouldn't increase our population. And I know that we spoke earlier just a little bit about our concerns, and our concerns is obviously, if you put an extra 1,000 people here on the island today, we're just not ready for that. So hence why it's really essential that we have an excellent strategy from this economic strategy, how we're going to achieve it, and quickly. If we've got to achieve 5,000 people in the next 5 years, we can't waste our time in that. And it's all about infrastructure, it's support. And and I understand the public's concern. I have that same concern. If I can't get mental health assistance for my constituents, if I can't get housing, local authority housing, there's a huge waiting list, and I can't get those people help. How on earth am I going to agree or be happy that 1,000 people are going to come to the island and support that? So it really is essential, and I personally don't see those markers yet, which get us there, and I really hope they come soon.
One of the criticisms I would give, there are some excellent ideas. It's very clear that the strategy has been considered reasonably well by the Council of Ministers. There's a clear message. It's a strong message of leadership from Council of Ministers. But there are a few obvious criticisms. The first one I would level is perhaps they haven't really done enough to explain to the public what the problems are that this strategy is trying to address. And you and Watterson, certainly in the time when we were ministers around the Council of Ministers table, many of the issues that were being talked about were now being talked about were entirely familiar to us 7-8 years ago. First of all, did we perhaps not do enough to address these issues? Secondly, did the former administration not do enough? And do you really think that the Manx public fully understand why such a big and bold strategy is required?
Well, thanks for such an easy question.
Three.
Yeah, I think you can track the source of this problem right the way back to the credit crunch and the financial services crunch between sort of 2008 2012. That then led to what we all now lovingly refer to as the VAT bombshell and the massive reduction in government income, which has led to a structural deficit every year since then. So we still have never quite got the books back in balance. So it is going to be really important to get high value jobs in to bridge that gap, to make sure that we are actually bringing in as much as we want to spend. And that's only going to happen by people who are higher earners coming to the Isle of Man to do these jobs. What we still yet have to see is how government is going to need to reshape and reorder to prepare for that, because we're looking out to 2037. We're already about a quarter down on our nurse and doctor numbers, as was revealed in a question this week. So we're going to have to increase the numbers by a third extra of what there are already. In the middle of a housing crisis, when people are really struggling to find places to live anywhere, never mind affordable places to live. We've got an ongoing issue around the pensions fund, which actually is probably actually far less of a worry now than it was then. But these are the sort of issues that are really going to have to be fleshed out in terms of that economic strategy. We not just need to know what the economy is going to look like by 2037, but also see the significant changes that are going to have to happen to our public services by then as well, and how you bridge that gap to say, and this is how those things lead to sustainable public finances over the next 15 years.
And Claire Christian, I mean, one of the immediate reactions that a number of young, economically active people that I've spoken to about this strategy since it was announced have said is, we can't wait for 15 years. We're really struggling at the moment. I mean, there are quite a lot of people who are in that perhaps starting their careers bracket, not on massive salaries. They're really, really struggling. So how does government get its message over to them that the purpose of this strategy is to address these issues that are immediate issues to many people?
So I think COVID highlighted, I thought, something very huge to the government, that the island's economy, albeit that we have some very large successful sectors, is made up of 70% of small businesses and self-employed people. So that in itself, is that a risk? Is that an opportunity? I'd say it's definitely both, because had that not been the scenario, whereby actually people are self-sustaining themselves, creating their own micro businesses, being entrepreneurial, had we not had that, we could have had a lot more people in, not with no job at all. But is that, obviously, I don't see the strategy behind either. Do we reduce that so that we can get these people into companies where there's bigger salaries, etc.? How do we reskill those people? What's the effort in reducing that number so that we give more job security? We're getting... we'll look at national insurance. I won't go necessarily into that. So when you're a director and, there's all sorts of different areas that you're not paying into. So it's really, really interesting. I didn't see that strategy, and I don't know where we're going with that. And I don't know if it's maintaining the 70% and growth is after that, or whether we are looking at addressing that. And one of my questions was, had self-employed people been consulted on this report? And they have, the Chief Minister and government have come back and they have said they actually, the answer is they have interviewed people. They don't know whether they were self-employed or not, but they feel they have a broad spectrum of the sort of areas of types of businesses on the island. But I think it's a different thing we need to be looking at. We actually need to be drilling down to those self-employed people and saying, what do you need to grow your your own empire, or what would you prefer to be? How do we get you into a business so you don't have to live hand to mouth, because that is what is happening. So it's really interesting. It's all great to look at the high level, but we really absolutely need to sort of drill down and start speaking to the self-employed people far more, in my opinion. But I am told that that's going to happen over the summer.
One of the I think the things that all small businesses or businesses, well, maybe not all, most businesses on the island would say, if you've got a good idea, whatever you do, don't go anywhere near government with it, because it will end up in a quagmire of bureaucracy. That's quite a big task in itself, Juan Watterson, and or getting that cultural change. And I think you touched on this in the debate about the economic strategy, that we don't have senior officers. I mean, we've lost most of the senior officers. We don't really have that level of experience in government to be able to deliver the change, let alone enough officers to come up with all these new policies that are going to be required if this bold strategy is to be delivered.
Well, maybe call me old-fashioned, but I would have thought that it was the job of ministers to come up with the policies, and it was up to the officers to deliver them. But yeah, lack of experience at that chief officer group is a concern. But with
lack
those
of numbers, actual physical people.
Numbers is
not
one
just,
thing, but
not just actual experience.
Yeah, well, that's where it's going to bite. But with that comes opportunity as well, doesn't it? In terms of taking areas that perhaps have been done traditionally in-house within government and spinning those out to other areas. So, for example, the UK started an infrastructure bank, and I'm not saying that that's a model for emulation in a far smaller place like this, but being able to sort of devolve a bit of that risk and a bit of that government gearing into the private sector is perhaps an opportunity that isn't naturally suited to having civil servants making those sort of decisions. That's not necessarily their expertise and training. It's they're the ones who need to put the good governance framework around this, and but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be an element of risk with the public purse. It's just a matter of managing it well and making sure that everyone knows what they're buying into.
You're listening to Perspective on Manx Radio, and I'm Phil Gorn, and I'm joined in the studio by the Speaker of the House of Keys, Juan Watterson, and, among other things, Chair of the Planning Committee, Claire Christian. We're having a troll back, a look back over the year to date in politics. It would be remiss of us not to mention the Ransom Tribunal. Mr. Watterson, you actually called for a general debate on this, but of course part of the problem with sort of poring over this politically at the moment is there are still quite a few ongoing matters that need to be addressed, which then means that there's only so much you can say, there's only so much the various people directly engaged with this can say. So, how significant an issue was this?
Well, it's massive. And you look back to last summer when the Public Accounts Committee sort of blew the lid on this particular case and took the evidence of Dr. Ransom and then published that not long before the dissolution. That has sent shockwaves around the public service, and you can see just how many senior officers have gone, I think, directly as a result of that. Perhaps slightly unfairly been referred to as Chief Minister Cannon's cultural revolution, but there has been an awful lot of people who have disappeared as a result. The opportunity is there for culture change, and you're right that we do have to be a little bit careful about what we say, but the new parliamentary year will be the time to get into this with gusto there, because that the case should have concluded by then, from what I'm gathering. We do have an independent review of the Office of Human Resources going on, so that will help feed into that debate. But there are so many lessons yet to learn and so much yet to do in order to make sure that the culture change lessons percolate out to those areas where maybe it hasn't quite reached yet, and there are still areas where falling short of some of the best practice that would be identified, but also real opportunities in terms of bringing back some of those people who have been through this system to help train those people who take on senior positions in government as to how to avoid some of these pitfalls before they get trapped into some of the behaviours that have led to where we are today.
Because that is part of the problem. I've got an hour-long special with the Chief Minister on agenda tomorrow at 6 o'clock, and one of the points that we discussed briefly was the Chief Minister made this comment about government being lazy, and what he was referring to there was, of course, the structures of government. So I sort of paraphrased for him and said, effectively what we're saying here is that the structures of government encourage civil servants to dream up all the reasons why certain things can't happen, as opposed to all the reasons why they should happen. And is that part of the problem? I mean, is that a common theme that you see in departments, Claire Christian?
So, did you say that the Chief Minister said that he thinks departments are lazy? So,
well, he was quoted as saying there was a lazy structure, and I think a number of civil servants had expressed a little bit of concern about this because they're very hard working.
That language itself is it certainly needs to be clarified by the Chief Minister. I hope he will take that opportunity to. I would say that I think that a lot of the government departments have been bogged down by bureaucracy, lots of red tape, and that's certainly been something that's been told to me by a lot of the civil servants. But this reform in terms of culture, I mean, I in my very, very short time as being a politician, just 2 years, I've been really shocked about what I've heard, what I've seen, and that comes through even at a constituency level, who are people who have worked in government who have been on the worst end of bullying and worked out of government, life-changing scenarios, and that's been a real shock, and I'm saddened that that's been the scenario. So this, for me, is not a surprise. I think it's an absolute opportunity, and we've got to grasp that now. If there was one thing that this government, this administration really needs to resolve, that is the culture, because ultimately we will get better services if people are happier in their jobs and they are able to do the job that they're being paid for to do. And
Juan Watterson, I mean, you've obviously been around the houses a lot longer than I think anyone in the House of Keys now. Do you think that the Chief Minister's onto something? I mean, most Chief Ministers describe a need for cultural change, but perhaps certainly in our administration we struggled to identify specifically what that cultural change needed to be.
I think it's been let's just say that government and the civil service and the public services generally are a curate's egg. There are parts of it that are absolutely brilliant, and there are parts of it that need improving. Where I think successive governments have struggled really is about giving those civil servants about clear priorities. Instead of asking them to do 80 things and not really putting the resources into any of them very much, and seeing which ones actually get done, actually giving a sense of priority to public servants would help, because you get an area which is well focused, which knows what it's after delivering, and there's just no better place to work in government when you've got officers like that who know what they're doing, getting on with it, getting it done, and making a real impact for government, for people's lives. If the structure isn't working anywhere in government, well, then Council Ministers has the almost unfettered ability to change that. It's a relatively simple process to do. It just needs that identification, political will to change it.
And in terms of the politics of all this, I mean, there's a few emails starting to come in here. One says, Phil, don't be naive. Government didn't lose senior civil servants. They were turfed out by political will, and it was all hushed up as retirements. Nothing short of a deliberate cull by Alf and his team, and his figures on cost of this cull simply don't stack up. So, I mean, that's one view. Obviously, I have to be a little bit balanced in the way I present these things. But is it fair to say that leadership tends to work best if you are coaxing and persuading rather than shouting, and there's that sort of culture of fear?
But leadership works best when you've got a vision and you've got a plan, and you say to everybody, follow me folks, this is where we're headed and we're going to deliver X, Y and Z, and everyone knows that there is the money, there's the political will, and there are the people there to deliver it. That's the success story. It's when you have areas, and I think this is perhaps one of the failings of DOI, perhaps, that they've been tasked with doing lots and lots and lots of things, haven't necessarily been given the people to do them in terms of the right people in the right place at the right time, or necessarily the money to do it the way that it should be done. And then when you've got so many diffuse priorities, it's hard then to corral people around a vision and say, yeah, we're going to achieve this and change that. So therein lies the rub, really, and that is one of the aspects of culture and leadership that really is going to have to be got a grip by the present cadre of ministers.
I do, obviously in both my other roles, but also with the radio, I come into contact with civil servants from time to time, and there does feel like at times to be a situation where they're flying at by the seat of their pants in terms of trying to keep up with all the things that they have to do. Claire Christian, how would you be going about doing this cultural change, which has to be an essential part of whatever the Canon administration plans in terms of delivering this big economic strategy?
So good culture starts from the top. And then it filters its way down. That's not just another bingo word from me. It has to start from the Chief Minister. So he has to show that he's not accepting bullying. He has to show that he is not accepting his managers not listening to people. And we're in really difficult times, because we've obviously, again, I'm mentioning coming out of COVID, people with a lot more mental health issues. People need obviously going back to work in the sense that they're back into the office, that people have been working from home, but people are, we're not in the same environments that we were, and we're certainly not in the same society that we were just 5 years ago. We have to do things differently, and we have to be more empathetic. But at the same time, we've got to be realistic. So in the sense that what I would do, and I have worked for great leaders in my industry prior, absolutely brilliant leaders, whereby there was certainly no shouting, and if you had a problem, you were never scared to put your hand up and say, I've done something wrong, or I can see something is going to go wrong. Your manager or your boss or your director would always pick that up, and that the buck would be with them. If something was going wrong, they would take that responsibility, and that is essential leadership, because otherwise, if you're too scared to say something's going to go wrong, or I've made a mistake at the lower levels, then you're never going to do that. And that's really critical for absolute brilliant delivery.
I'm not going to miss an opportunity to hop on an old hobby horse here about training for ministers. We take people off the streets through the purpose of a general election. We throw them into large, complicated organisations. Very few people on this island have got experience of delivering any sort of organisation that's so large and complicated as a government department. And to expect them just to be able to sort of sink or swim on the advice of some senior civil servants who actually may not themselves at the moment have a huge amount of experience is not a recipe for success. So I don't think we should be afraid of spending not a huge amount of money, but actually giving the politicians who we're putting into these ministerial roles, and those who are coming up after them, the tools to be able to do the job properly.
In relation to the bold vision that has been released then this week by the Chief Minister, in effect, if we cut away the glossy pictures and the fantastically well presented words, effectively we're left with a new residence drive, and this is effectively every time that we've had a problem since we introduced the sort of low tax model, which our economy has been based on in the 60s. Every time there's been an economic problem, we've gone for a new residence drive, and that's provided a short-term fix. But the population has doubled since we introduced the low tax economy, and still we have a problem. Is the problem not more to do with the overall way in which income and expenditure is done by government, rather than let's just carry on boosting the economically active population until they get old or need education for their children? Surely a more sustainable model needs to be found here. I don't know. Claire, Christian, do you want to?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously, we talk about income and expenditure, and I absolutely, maybe I need some more lessons in being able to read the budget, but I'm still absolutely and I've seen budgets for large corporations. I'm still baffled by a lot of it.
Treasury mandarins would be delighted to hear you say that.
So it would be great to be able, and I know there is the Treasury Minister is bringing in reform in that area, and I hope that those issues are addressed. But to your better management of the income is huge, and the last administration was criticised for a lot of overspend. Now, overspend will happen because obviously costs are going up. We are going to see that. But is it the actual budgets from the beginning? Are they being misrepresented? Are we taking the cheapest solution? And then actually when work starts, we realise that's inexperience. And it's very, very concerning. And everybody who I've spoken to with regards to perhaps the promenade, it's all about, well, I could have done that job better myself, and everybody believes that, and it's all very well to say in hindsight, but we do have to get a better grip on our spends, and that comes down to departmental level as well. It's not just the tenders that are being put through. So it is. I would like to see a lot more centralisation with priorities. I think the public really need to be considered in this aspect. Look, we're going to invest more in these top 10 areas, and that means these other 10 areas are not going to have as much investment in it. That I think we need to see a little bit more clarity like that, so that the Manx residents, the Joe Bloggs on the street, can understand why his potholes aren't being filled this year, and actually why we're investing more in mental health, or we're investing more in heart surgeries, or we're investing more in all sorts of other areas. So that's what I would like to see more transparency on.
Juan, Watterson, is our tax and spend relationship working as well as it needs to?
Well, one of the other things that's come out of this, and you refer to it as a well-presented presentation, but you'd expect no less from KPMG, would you? But it is 600 pages, and I haven't barely got started on this yet. It's a massive job to actually sort of get under the skin of over the summer. But one of the things we are going to be needing to look at as part of this, and I think has been recognised, is as a broadening of the tax base itself, so that we're not just reliant on the usual sources of income tax and VAT and then fees and charges, but to sort of see how that mix works, and whether all the aspects that are doing well in the economy are paying their part. And we've made a very big point of being 0% corporate tax. But whether that's sustainable, it probably is. But are there other ways of making sure that businesses carry their part of the weight in society? And that's something that I will be looking carefully at over the summer. In terms of the population drive, I would say we've moved on from that. That was the 70s and 80s model. This is a jobs drive, and it's got to be a well-paid jobs drive. Although some of those jobs will be in the public service as well. So, we are talking sort of nurses and doctors as well. And I've noticed that we've only got 8 minutes left. And if you get me started on the budget process with 8 minutes left, I'll be still talking here at 2:30.
I think it's really interesting just to say, I think a shift that's happening very much so. Talk about ring fencing. That's been a real sort of conversation in this administration about how we'll make money here and we'll ring fence that to provide this. And I think that's a really good way of communicating to the public as well, and a good way of saying, okay, we've done that and we've achieved this. I think that's really good. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that kind of ring fencing money for certain projects.
The soft drinks levy was a good example of that. And who put that motion down in 2016? Oh, it was Foresight.
Sensibly. One of the areas of raising tax, of course, I mean, the three, aren't there? The VAT, which we have no control over, provided we wish to retain the relationship with the United Kingdom on that. Income tax, we're always told you can't really do an awful lot with headline rates of income tax because of the competitive nature of the economy that we tend to be in. So, but the other area, local taxation, rates, as it's called in the Isle of Man, tends to have been largely ignored, and yet it is remarkably low compared with most of the countries that we compete with. I'm told that Isle of Man government, council of ministers at least, say that local government reform isn't even on their B list of priorities for the next, it's 4 years now, isn't it?
And that was obvious in the debate.
So if we're not going to look at that area, we're not going to do any reform in that area. Rates reform seems to have become a distant prospect as well. Is government missing a trick?
Yes, it is, absolutely, and call me cynical, but if you look at the impact of rates reform on the northern parishes of the island, you'd see probably the biggest areas that would actually see a negative impact. One of the things that we were talking about in a presentation not that long ago in a hub was about how you could potentially disconnect rates from the delivery of local services. So I'm not saying don't charge rates, but actually just disconnect them from local services. So you've got commercial rates, which obviously far higher in places like Douglas, as you'd expect, but also places like the quarry, the airport, which actually have a disproportionate effect on the rates income of certain parishes and mean that they cross-subsidise the domestic rate. Whether that's reasonable and fair or not is something else. But if you took those commercial rates out as part of the fund to help build the new economy that we're talking about, then that's going to mean a real levelling up in some sense, down in others, about what that's going to mean for people around the island for their domestic rates. It will be a great leveller, but that's not going to be popular.
Well, exactly. And isn't this part of the problem that you face in Tynwald? Ultimately, when it comes to it, particularly in the House of Keys, you've got to think of your forthcoming election, those of you who choose to stand again. And one of the least popular things you can do as a politician is concede point in relation to unfairness on rates that result in your ratepayers having to pay more. Are we too local in the way that we look at politics? Is that part of the problem, do you think?
Sometimes, absolutely. And that the bigger the constituency, the easier it is to sort of take that step away. And going back to the days when we had 1, 2 and 3 seat constituencies, I think you were able to sort of take a broader view when you had a far more balanced population in a 3-seat constituency than the micro politics of a 1-seat constituency. So I think it's going to be making sure that when this boundary commission comes back that we've just launched in Tynwald this week, make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of some of the fundamentals of good decision making.
I think I mean, obviously you've just hit the nail on the head a little bit there, Phil, saying that it's not going to happen, it's on the B list, and it really isn't. I mean, you've got 8 members of 8 Douglas MHKs, it's one of which is in the Council of Ministers, and
no Southerners.
Dear. Goodness me. And so it's never going to come through. And maybe the only way for this to be a priority would be if you had a Douglas Chief Minister, which you'll have to tell me, when has that ever happened, Phil?
Not at all. Well, unfortunately, I seem to have had a habit of this today. I we've run out of time. I almost didn't make it to the show at all because I was too busy enjoying a nice cup of tea. Anyway, thanks very much, everyone, for listening. If you want to listen again, the programme is available as a podcast. And I would ask anyone who's interested and wants to know the Chief Minister's thinking on this, have a listen to Agenda tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. It's an hour-long special. But for now, I'm Phil Gorn, Guramayo, and thanks for listening.